infrastructure projects so as to be able to attract institutional financing for infra projects. We have amongst us some of the finest name in the industry, a very distinguished panel, and it's my proud privilege to introduce them. Dr. O.P. Agarwal, he is the chairman of FICCI Committee on Urban Transformation and CEO WRI, World Resource Institute. Mr. A. Shankar is the Chief Operating Officer, Strategic Consulting of JLL India and Sri Lanka. We have Mr. Raghu Keswan, who is Senior Infrastructure Specialist at the World Bank, and Ms. Vijay Lakshmi Lakshmanan, Head Corporate Center, L&T Smart World and Communication. The session will be moderated by Mr. Sudeep Datta. He's a partner, Government and Public Sector Strategy and Transactions with EY. Well, without much of ado, I would now like to invite Dr. O.P. Agarwal for his formal welcome address. Just to give a little brief about him, Dr. Agarwal is highly respected thinker and practitioner with decades of experience in cities, urban transport, and climate change. Earlier, in his role as a bureaucrat, he has been instrumental in driving some of the key urban policies with the Government of India. And he has also been a senior advisor at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. With his wealth of knowledge and experience, FICCI is indeed extremely proud and privileged to have him as a chairman of FICCI Urban Transformation Committee. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Nitya. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are.
Good evening to everyone, and a very warm welcome for this interactive discussion on the Union Budget, an urban transformation perspective. As we are all aware, cities are critical for us today, and critical for many reasons. First is the government has articulated an ambition to become a $10 trillion economy, something that I think people may say is ambitious, but something which is where India should aspire to be. But if it has to become a $10 trillion economy from its current level of about 2.7, then cities have to not only accommodate this growth, but also enable this growth. Second, very recently, our Prime Minister made rather generous commitments, I think very welcome commitments and generous commitments at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, a number of climate commitments that were made. Now, fulfillment of those commitments also requires cities to take the lead in trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Finally, I think the urban densities that we see in urban areas have attracted the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is why how we plan and manage our cities is going to be critical. We can get everything right if we get our cities right, and everything will go wrong if we don't get our cities right. So getting our cities right means getting a wide range of public services right. Estimates of urban infrastructure needs have varied between rupees 80 lakh crores to rupees 35 lakh crores over the next 20 years. The public budget clearly cannot support this because even the Smart Cities mission has offered 1 lakh crores over 5 years as against the need of, say, about 80 lakh crores over 20 years. So this is a huge gap. And this is where we need the private sector to come in, make the right kind of investments. And that is the criticality of where financing comes in. But for private investments, it's very important that projects are viable. Cities do not have the financial muscle to pay for them. They have to depend on grants from the central and state governments. These are reducing over time because there are demands on the public budget in various other places. And that is why devolution of funds has been unpredictable and cities have not been able to really live up to what they are supposed to do. And the result of this is that all these urban local bodies have been caught up at a low level of equilibrium. They are generating less revenue and spending even less on services and infrastructure. The inadequate revenue sources of ULBs captures the economic buoyancy of the local area, leading to overall weak creditworthiness. Hence, there is an immense need to strengthen the ULBs and empower them to enhance their revenues. Today, we hope to deliberate upon the need to improve the underlying financial viability of the urban infrastructure projects and also attract institutional financing. Credit enhancement, support for urban infrastructure projects, and ULBs to be made as the sole focal point for top-down flow of urban schemes are some of the points that will come up during the discussion. And this is what we hope will find place even in the upcoming union budget on the 1st of February. So with this little background, I look forward to an encouraging and interactive discussion. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from all of this today. And once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much, and back to you, Nitya.
Thank you, Dr. Agrawal. Indeed, very crisp that you're known for putting things across very clearly, very crystal clear. With this, I would now like to hand over the session to our moderator, Mr. Sudeep Datta, but not before introducing him as the most suitable resource for carrying out the session forward. Ladies and gentlemen, Sudeep brings with him over 30 years of experience in infrastructure project development and implementation, PPP advisory, project structuring and financing, smart cities, treasury management, and industrial urban development. May I now request Sudeep for setting the context for today's session and moderating the session thereafter. Sudeep, I'm sure you will manage your time well with all our participants. Thank you so much. Sudeep, over to you.
Thank you, Nitya. So good evening, everyone. And at the outset, let me mention that it's a privilege for me to be part of a very esteemed panel. Dr. O.P. Agrawal, who I consider himself to be my mentor, Shankar, Raghu, and Vijay Lakshmi. Thank you very much for joining us, and we really look for an exciting session ahead. And also a warm welcome to all of you who have joined this panel discussion today. So before we get into the panel discussion, let me try to set the context of the discussion today. What we know today is that the Indian real GDP growth, as per the data that we received from the NSO, is something at about 9.2%, which is about 30 basis points from what was originally down from what it was originally predicted or by IMF or RBI at 9.5%. But 9.2% is still an extremely formidable recovery. Of course, remember that we are still in the last quarter, and this is an advanced estimate. Depending on how the pandemic situation goes, we may be plus minus 10 basis points, but still we would certainly look at a 9% growth on GDP this year. And this will be, in fact, one of the highest among the major advanced and emerging market economics. So I think this is a great work done by the country in terms of leading the economic recovery post-pandemic. As we look at FY23, I think we're looking at something like about between the estimates that we have from the multilateral agencies, something like about 6.5% to 8.7% or 9% in the next year, which will also be, if achieved, be of the highest among the major advanced and emerging economics. Some of the other indicators, which is the gross fixed capital formation, which is a measure of investment, has shown a strong growth of 15% against a drop of 10.8% last year. The final consumption expenditure of the government is estimated to grow by 7.6%, up significantly from 2.9%. Private financial consumption expenditure is about 6.9 to 7% against a major contraction of 9.1% last year. So private consumption, while there has been a growth, is still very soft, and I think the budget would look at trying to boost the confidence of people in increasing private consumption. So all of these trends do indicate that we are looking at, as we go into the second budget in the COVID scenario, we're looking at a significant level of recovery, and the two indicators that are worrisome is the current spike in COVID period, though it seems to be under control, and the second, of course, is global inflationary pressure that is happening in almost all the economies. So those are the two things that we need to watch out for. But overall, I think we will get into the next year with a lot more of optimism than we had last year. And I think to India to drive the global economic agenda and to leverage on all the advantages that we have had this year, we will need to continue to grow at about 8 to 9% over the next 10 years. And I think that is a target that we need to do, is consistently looking at achieving 8 or 9% GDP growth every year from now on for at least a decade, which would see us getting out of all our economic issues and getting into a lead position. And if this has to be achieved, then the urban India needs to play a huge role. And I think we would all be aware that urban India, while occupying only about 3 to 4% of the surface area of the country, has a contribution of about 60% of the GDP, and this is expected to go up to about 70% in another 10 years' time. So it is very finely recognized that a lot of our growth prospects of the country are going to be driven by how urban infrastructure moves. And what has been very encouraging is that over the last decade or so, the urbanization, the urban agenda has been finally recognized by the governments as well as institutions. Last few budgets have seen a lot of focus on the urban infrastructure from a time, maybe 10 years back, it was all about rural and personal taxation, etc. But right for the last decade or so, the investment in the urban infrastructure has grown significantly, and that is something that we need to look at with a lot of positivity, and that needs to be sustained, if not increased. While all of this investment is happening, the rapid urbanization and population growth is continuing to put a lot of pressure on our infrastructure. And I read somewhere that about 50% of the current urban infrastructure is aging and needs to be replaced in the next 10 decades. So, as Dr. Agarwal was talking about, there is a huge amount of investment that will be required as we go forward to drive the urban agenda. And we also have the Smart City Mission, which has promoted the use of technology and innovation, and that agenda needs to be moved ahead. So as we look at transforming the country from a very largely rural-driven economy to a majorly urban-driven economy, I think all our energies need to focus on economic growth, which is inclusive and sustainable. And it is, of course, a little bit of a concern that in spite of all of these activities, our cities are still facing a huge amount of sustainability and efficiency issues. And none of our cities are consistently coming up in the top 50 cities globally. So I think there is clearly a lot of work to be done. A very recent Niti Aayog report studied the urban scenario, and they concluded it very well. They said that the Indian urban scenario may either be lauded globally or it would create irreversible damages in the next 10 years. So that's a pretty big statement, and whether we are able to do so or not would depend on the corrective policy measures and actions taken at the beginning of this decade. So I think as we start this decade, this is a very, very critical area, and whether it is going to be a story which the world will look up to, or whether it will create a damages, is going to be substantially dependent on how we as a country are able to carry this agenda of urban transformation. And therefore, this is an issue that is very, very pertinent, and we really look at suggestions from all the panelists that we can carry home. Some of the key issues remain the lack of integrated urban planning, underdeveloped ecosystem, our incapability of attracting private investments, substantially suboptimal use of land, lack of capacity at the urban local bodies, at the local authorities, and so on and so forth. So we would like to discuss some of these issues and try to work out a way forward by which we could create a transformatory impact on the urban story. And I do believe that the budget would also provide a strong opportunity to focus on all the reforms that has been identified in the last few years, and take this on to develop institutions and framework to strengthen implementation. With this, I would like to move on to the panel discussion, and like to start with Vijay Lakshmi. Vijay, one of the key issues that has been continuously raised time and again is that the urban sector in particular has not been able to attract enough private investment, whether it is the ecosystem or whether it's the regulatory system. Somehow we've not been able to succeed in getting private investment. So your take on this, and what we as a country, or what as a finance minister could do to improve this and attract private investment into the sector.
Thank you, Sudeep. We've been implementing smart city projects from Larsen & Toubro. Almost 25 cities we've completed, and we are operating them. Most of the smart city project has been funded by both the state and the central government. And there had been urban infrastructure projects like early warning dissemination system or traffic management systems funded by the multilateral banks, wherever the projects have a significant impact in terms of saving public lives from natural calamities or plays an important role in prevention of accidental deaths. When it comes to the next mode of funding in terms of inviting somebody to participate in a PPP mode for any of these infrastructure projects, urban infrastructure projects, there should be a identified revenue model and an established financial feasibility. There should be at least a minimum guarantee to the lenders and the investors in terms of a return on their investments in case the revenue model fails, because all these charges and the levies that we are assuming are being imposed for the first time, and we don't have really a precedence or a detailed study in terms of how successful these assumptions would be. To quote a few examples of how it had turned out, if I can give you an example of smart lighting in PPP projects that has come out of tenders in some of the cities, they did not really take off as we could not quantify the power savings due to the lack of past data on actual power consumption the ULBs have done, which we can attribute to the lighting alone. The other example would be the free Wi-Fi projects that we had implemented across all the smart cities. There is a huge support in terms of adoption, usage of free Wi-Fi services. And when the cities ask us to monetize those Wi-Fi services, giving them a premium service after the free period is over, there are absolutely no takers. And after the usage of free, they use till the free services available and they log off. In terms of even comparing these three modes of funding the urban infrastructure, PPP projects would load anywhere between 16 to 70% because it will have to be funded by both equity and 60 to 70 to 80% of debt. So the average cost of funds is basically going to a financial intermediary. Neither it goes to the implementer or the implementing agency or being spent on the public good. Even a budget funded one would load a 3% cost. The ideal way of funding this project has always been multilateral funded project, because the cities are able to extend it to a larger project outlay. And a financial tie-up before the tender comes out gives an immense comfort for credible players to participate. So in terms of attracting private investments, as I said, there should be a detailed feasibility study on the revenue model. There should be captive users and an assured offtake. And there should definitely be compensation if these assumptions fail and the revenue model doesn't work. And there is a lack of strong regulatory setup where we can quickly resolve disputes, which will all this would contribute into bringing more interest from the investors. And there had been past cases because ULBs can charge from the customers. The private players do not have the mandate, because whatever success we've done in the power sector or road sector, we have not been able to extend it to the ULB services. Some of the bad cases with the lending community, like effluent treatment plants or solid waste management projects, even drinking water supply projects under PPP mode have turned into an NPA. So there is an amount of apprehension among the lenders also to fund these projects. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think one of the key issues that we have in the urban infrastructure is that the projects basically does not seem to be financially viable. There doesn't seem to be an underlying cash flow which can secure the project. So if we come to Dr. Agarwal, I think that is one of the key issues, that majority of the urban infrastructure projects, because of its nature, does not appear to be financially viable, and hence private investment or institutional funds are not coming in. So your views on this, and how do we work out to take up this challenge, which is clearly the smart cities PPP targets have not been met at all. So where do we go from here?
Thanks, Sudeep. You're absolutely right. A lot of these urban infrastructure projects are not financially viable, but it is something that is not unknown. And I would say that there are two primary reasons why many of these projects turn out to be financially unviable. To my mind, one is the political hesitancy in raising tariffs. So there is a political concern that if you raise prices, votes will come down. Classic example is water, where you have piped water supply available at a much lower price in your bathroom, so to say. whereas the poorer people pay a much higher price to get tanker water. So this is a classic case where I think the political hesitancy has come in the way. People are actually willing to pay more for good quality water. The second is, I think, a more legitimate reason why many of these services are essential services. And for governments, they are part of their universal service obligation. And many of them are unaffordable at viable prices. So I think what governments need to do is not look at financial viability, which the private investor will obviously look at, but how can governments supplement that revenue so that it becomes financially viable? And some of the avenues for that are really the land assets that government agencies own. Monetizing those land assets can be a huge revenue source for governments. Maybe tax exemptions on many services. Bus services today are heavily taxed, yet metro services are not taxed. So can we think of public transport as one uniform thing, where if you don't have a tax for one, let's have no tax for the other? And these services actually own a lot of land, which is not being monetized. So I think innovative ways in which governments can supplement the revenue that comes is what will help make many of these financially viable, even though upfront they don't look financially viable. The one last point I would like to mention on this is really picking up from what Vijayalakshmi said. I think the message she was giving is, when you don't have a good revenue model, which means that you haven't done enough preparation to look at the O&M phase. We've only looked at money that we can get for the project construction phase and get it commissioned. But have we done an honest job of the O&M stage? Because that O&M stage is what is critical for the success of any project. That is something that doesn't happen. And I think investment in good project preparation is the need of the hour. This is something that does not seem to happen, at least from my experience. Let me leave it to that and back to you, Sudhir.
So I think I completely agree with you. In fact, one of the biggest criticism of the smart city mission is that we've created all these right assets, but how do we carry on? Where do we go from there? How do we manage it? And most of the projects are funded. The OM is funded for the next 5 years. But what happens after the 5 years is going to be a very, very critical issue. And I think that is something we will really need to address as we go forward. And just a little bit moving on to urban services and our deliveries, coming to Shankar. I think, we have had quite a lot of major mega infrastructure schemes, the JNORM, the Amrut, the smart cities, and now we have the Amrit 2, we have PM Awas Yojana. All of them has been looking at trying to improve the quality of urban services. And interestingly, many of these schemes, other than the capex, also has a reform agenda associated to it, which should have substantially improved the health of the authorities or would have improved the quality of urban services. So what is your take on their effectiveness, or what, as we go ahead, maybe coming up with the Amrit 2 scheme, we're coming up with the green city schemes, what are the key learnings that you think we should take forward as the next schemes come in place?
Yeah, thanks, Sudeep. I think it's very important. So we have seen smart cities, we have seen Amrut, the success rate of smart city Amrut, even though we have progressed a little bit, but not to the extent of it is to be supposed to do. So I think we need to understand the key challenges in many of those schemes, so-called the flagship schemes by Government of India. Smart city, even though it is being promoted as a more the service oriented, but later on, if you look at many of the cities that adopted different initiatives under the smart city, but the crux of the smart city more from a technology and digitization perspective is not reflective of. Why? Because many of the projects are not viable. So we also advise many cities in the smart city space, but the problem here is that while we identify a project which is need of the hour for that particular city, but it is not financially viable. So I think end of the day, it is about creating a structure for a public-private partnership and also creating a kind of a guideline for the public-private partnership, at least for the urban infrastructure space. Because what we have at this point in time is that the guidelines are all unified for any infrastructure, be it the large-scale infrastructure, trunk infrastructure, and the urban infrastructure. So that's number one. And when I talk about the urban services, I think the priority at this point in time for any city in India is something to do with water, waste, healthcare, and housing. I think these are the four elements which going to be very, very important in near future. And I'm sure in the budget which is going to come, there's going to be a lot of talks around this and how to integrate all of these in one platform. We know we have talked a lot since 74th Constitution Amendment about silos, departments working in silos. Now, how to bring in a unified manner is the key. While in a smart city try to do something, but end of the day, there should be a flagship project which should highlight or which should implement all of these projects in a unified manner. I also do understand many are state subjects, many are local body related, but how to bring in. I think in this budget, we are expecting many such initiatives to come in. One, focus on water. Water is the need of the hour. Many cities are struggling with innovative water initiatives. Many private parties are also coming in, but the cost factor is so high because many of those private parties who are into these import a lot of these equipments from elsewhere. So we need to provide incentives to the equipment manufacturers and chemicals which are related to water management. So that's one important thing. And also there should be consideration from a GST perspective. I think even GST is the highest in water. I think it's a basic commodity, and water treatment equipment and chemicals, the GST is higher. So we need to reduce much about the GST standpoint. And very important, I think in this budget, I think I'm expecting there will be a lot of talks on decentralized and community-based sewage treatment, because every city today is dotted with many large-scale residential and township development. So I think the push towards decentralized and community-based sewage treatment is the need of the hour. And when it comes to waste management, again, since we do have large-scale developments, I think it is about the net zero concept should be at the building or the project level. So that is very, very important. And we also talked about circular economy, and how to adopt the circular economy within a development is very, very critical. And I'm sure Indian cities also need this extra financial support for water and also waste by providing workforce. Today the skill is not there. The capacity building exercise needs to be done at a grassroots level. The advanced technology. Today we have a lot of startups, a lot of the digital ecosystem coming in this space, but are we incentivizing enough? Because data is not available to them. Because today the government authorities, local bodies keep the data within themselves. They don't give it off to the public for assimilation and to assess the gap and the demand. So that is another important. Healthcare, we talked a lot about healthcare, but how to integrate healthcare with the entire urban scenario of a city, because healthcare is always viewed as a kind of a siloed department. So how to integrate, because today healthcare, at least in the last two years, healthcare is becoming prominent. Many private entities are coming up to get into the healthcare infrastructure. So today we are advising many corporates who wants to get into healthcare infrastructure, existing healthcare players getting into the public healthcare space more from the ecosystem perspective. So how to give incentives and how to provide. The end of the day, it's all about the land. The land is expensive in cities. So we need to tie this together with the asset monetization plan provided by the government. I think we need to earmark a lot of these land owned by state governments and public authorities for specific to healthcare, because for that we need to do a kind of an in-depth location consulting or location advisory feasibility towards that particular aspect, so that it becomes viable for the private entity who is coming into that space. And the last but not the least, very important, is affordable housing. A lot of discussion happened in affordable housing in the last few years, but if you ask me, is it really successful from a private player standpoint? It is not, because private developers already, they are burning their fingers with the existing projects they are running it. So it is very important to relook at the definition of affordable housing. What is affordable in Mumbai may not be affordable in a small town in near Agra. So I think it is very important to have a kind of a standardization of instead of having a standard model across India. I think the affordable housing definition should be relooked at it. And apart from that, in line with the affordable housing, we have a lot of things which we need to look closely is about the associated support for affordable housing. So we said that affordable housing is going to be successful, but unless until we provide incentives in terms of let's say, again, I'm taking up GST. So reducing the GST and bringing down the input tax is very, very important. And today the affordable housing has to be tied up with the requirement of that particular city or the particular town or the particular area, because the pricing of the affordable housing is not determined by the market. It's determined by the market forces. I think it's very important. It has to be so affordable so that the needy and the person who is in need is looking at the affordable housing. So I think a lot of perspectives in that. And at the end of the day, I think all of these things should tie together in more from a sustainable and environmental social governance that ESG is also picking up a lot. So how to tie these things together to make a better world for the entire the population of this country is very, very important. I stop here. I can answer any questions.
So thank you, Shankar. I think that is one good point is on reforms of GST. And I think with the GST collection and the taxation collection becoming quite healthy this year, I think it is a good time to relook at the GST and see whether it can be reformed. It probably will not happen in the budget. It would probably happen subsequently. But I think that is one area that is very important. I think two things that has really affected the smart city. One part of it is what Dr. Agarwal said about project preparation. So many of the smart city plans that have been built up and the projects that have been identified when it actually went into implementation stage, it was found to be not only financially viable, but many were found to be not also technically viable. And the other part has been that it has been difficult for most of the urban local bodies to bring in their financial share, and therefore the projects have got stuck. So in that point, I would like to come to you, Raghu. I think one of the most important things is to how do we strengthen the financial capacities of the ULB? How do we enhance their creditability so that they can raise finance? Good to hear experience, whether from India or for global or globally.
Yeah, thank you, Sudeep. Yeah, so as you rightly said, the ULB finances are really at the heart of a lot of the discussions that we've been having now. And in terms of the viability of projects, I mean, as Dr. Agarwal was also mentioning, having a project-to-project viability is not easy all the time. So a lot of it is going to fall back on what is the kind of level of cities' finances and what is the kind of taxes that they have, which can use to actually support the financial viability. And that financial viability is critical for the PPPs as well. Now, in the case of Indian cities, I think one of the biggest weak points has been that I think the cities' own source revenues are really, really weak. And the cities have not been able to sort of tap into the economic growth of happening within their own cities' jurisdictions. So that has been, I think, one of the biggest, drawback. And here, let me just point out to one or two critical sources. One of the most important sources is property taxes. Now, property taxes actually are a key source of revenues for city governments globally. And this is totally underutilized in case of India. So that, just to give an example, firstly, Indian cities are, none of the cities probably have a capital value system of property taxation, whereas globally they are all mostly capital value system. And as a proportional capital value, Indian cities property taxation is probably just in the range of 0.0 to 0.05% only, whereas globally, even for the developing countries, it will be in the range of 0.5 to 1% of the capital value of the properties. I'm just talking about countries like Brazil, which are sort of comparable for large federal countries. And in developed countries, it's above that as well. It will be 1% plus in case of United States as a percentage of the capital value. So property taxes tend to remain very, very weak, and that's one area of reforms I think which should really happen, supported by the state government in terms of moving towards much stronger ULB revenues. And the other is, again, as was mentioned, is the very weak tariffs regime that we have here. Now, here again, I think we are simply nowhere close to even O&M cost recovery, leave alone capital cost recovery part. Here again, I think the Indian cities barely, for water supply, barely cover 50 to 60% of O&M cost recovery. Whereas globally, they would cover the full O&M cost, and besides that, covering a big part of the capital cost as well. And so that is another area of reforms. And I think city government should bring in place more ring fencing of departments, at least financially, so that everybody knows what is it that those tariffs are covering and what is the level of subsidy that is required. And this will sort of probably help move the cities to path towards greater financial sustainability. And the same financial own source revenues of the cities are also very important for underpinning the PPP contracts, because if the PPP contracts don't have underlying viability, then the private sector can't do anything about it. As Vijayalakshmi was saying, that if they don't have the authority to collect revenues directly in many cases, and even if those revenues they're able to collect, it's quite low. So the idea is how do you put together a financial package, whether it is through proper taxation, whether it is through a path towards increased tariffs or whatever is make it work is really at the heart of it. Now, in terms of coming to the creditworthiness and the ability to raise more finances. So here I want to say a couple of things. So one of the key determinants of the ability to borrow is the creditworthiness, which is again underpinned by that own source revenues. That's one part. But the second part is also not only that. The second part is also that the cities don't have they have an underlying need, but they don't seem to express that through demand to actually borrow. And in the sense, they don't seem to want to actually approach the financial markets to actually borrow. And some of our internal analysis shows that actually among top 27 Amrut cities, they actually have untapped potential to borrow, but they don't seem to want to borrow. So that's actually a puzzle. So the real issue is that what is it the constraint that they face? And I suspect it has got to do with the institutional capacity. They simply do not have the bandwidth and the capacity to implement projects beyond a scale, beyond a certain level of capital and capex. So how do we help the cities actually significantly ramp up their capacity to actually invest in complete projects on time and take up more level of capex expenditures? This is really at the heart of also trying to make sure that we can meet our urban infrastructure demand supply gap, and for them to have an incentive to actually borrow as well. Otherwise, they're pretty much satisfied to simply take the grants from central schemes and state schemes and do a sort of a low level kind of capital investment. So they all need strong capital investment planning, a horizon for moving to higher level of orbit in terms of capex, and that's sort of underpinned by a very robust financial plan, which combines borrowings, own source revenues, and other sources of funding. So let me just stop there.
Yeah, I think, Raghu, that's a very interesting point, that there are various urban local bodies which have the financial strength to raise money, but they don't have the willingness and probably don't want to take up the liability. And you're pretty used to getting government subsidies, and there's always a fear how to manage those funds. So I just come to Dr. Agarwal in that case. The urban local bodies are, I think, the focal point of our urban development, and to a large extent, the local bodies have not, except for a few large ones, really not been able to take up projects. And even in the smart city, we see only about 10-15 top smart city SPVs backed by the urban local bodies have succeeded to take up something like 60-70% of the project. But there are many of the smart cities not even able to take about 15-20% of the project. So is that a issue of capacity of the urban local bodies, or how do we develop those local bodies, strengthen those local bodies to play the role that it should have?
Thanks, Sudeep. I think it is very much an issue of local capacities. In fact, it's not just the larger cities and the smaller cities, but I would say if you look at states, across states. I'm talking of the JNNURM. That's the time when I was in the ministry. And the JNNURM, if you remember, had a large pot of money, and it was almost like a first come, first serve. States like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, they are the ones who first came up with the projects and took away a fairly large chunk of what was available. The other states itself could not come up with ideas. So it is really lack of capacities, not just at the city level, but even at the state level, where the confidence to be able to prepare projects well and take it down to something like a JNNURM, or prepare a city development plan, or prepare a smart city plan, and get that going. I think there are huge capacity gaps. And sadly, something that we have tended to brush under the carpet. We've looked at capacity only in terms of the financial capacity. We've not looked at it as the human capacity. When you don't have the right human capacity and you get a large pot of money, you don't know what to do with that money. So I would completely agree that there is a huge problem of capacity. Very often people tend to say that you bring in lateral entrants. That's how you will get the capacity. But it doesn't really work so simply. Bringing in capacity from outside or bringing in lateral entrants, how do they gel into the system that already exists? And there are often cultural differences. There are differences in how people sort of interact with each other, how they view the system. There is a certain ethos of public service that often people coming from outside are not able to pick up very well. Challenges. My own recommendation on this will be to really think of a large and ambitious capacity building program. What the Smart Cities mission did was, it has given a fairly large amount of money to every city to build their own capacities. Now, just giving them money to build capacities is not enough. You need to have a program that people can go to. And programs are not easy to design. So this is where the central government needs to get into the picture, design a quality program, really high quality program, so that that money can be used for people to come and attend this program. So I think human capacity is something that has been neglected. The other issue that we need to look at, and again, many of the panelists mentioned this, is data. Where are the data systems, the credible data systems that you can use for future analysis or for making demand projections? Where are the demand estimation models? Very often the models that we are using are prepared in the US. We are using those models. And believe me, the transport sector, which I am familiar with, the demand estimation models developed in the US really don't apply to our situation. We are so different. So I think these are capacities which we need to build, human capacity, tools that can be used in the Indian context to give us more credible results for the future. I think the whole range of work on capacity building that needs to be done.
So, Dr. One quick related questions. We have been talking about municipal cadres creation for a long period of time. Is that on the card, or is it a solution to that?
I haven't seen anything happening on that. I'm told, I honestly have not been keeping track of it also, but I'm told that some states have started on it, but nothing is visible to me on that municipal cadre. I think this is again something where the Mahua could really step in and come up with some model. It need not be a central service. I'm not suggesting that it's a central service or even an all India service. It should be a state service. But can some kickstarting be done from Mahua? I think that would be a good step to take up. I think that is needed. Capacities. I'll tell you, when the Smart Cities mission started, one of my colleagues, I used to work with the Indian School of Business at that time. One of my colleagues came up and said that a certain state wanted to recruit some 100 urban planners. And when we looked at what were the qualifications for those urban planners, it was everything other than urban planning.
Yeah.
So civil engineers were accepted, economics people were accepted. I'm saying don't reject them, but your basic urban planning qualification has to be there. Now, this is where I feel, capacity, the human capacity element has not been given the attention it needs.
Right, from the viability to capacity, let's move on to sustainability. I'll come to Raghu on this. I think what we do believe that cities have a major role in handling climate change, and a lot of the choices that are made by the cities and policymakers will influence the way our lives and how the economies work out in the next many years. So how would you say that governments, institutions, or how could we make government institutions enable them to make the right choices?
Yeah, thanks, Sudeep. Yeah, so this is actually a sort of emerging topic in the context of urban, and climate change is really, as Dr. Agarwal was also mentioning in the beginning, cities are really central to the climate change agenda. So a few thoughts on that. So firstly, we now have a newly articulated set of sort of India's NDCs from the Glasgow, that net zero by 2070, reduction in GHG emissions by 1 billion tons by 2030, etc., etc. So cities have a big role to play. I mean, so can cities target net zero cities like many global cities have done? So that could be sort of an interesting thought. But coming to the role, the role of cities, so general analysis seems to indicate that the cities account for 70 to 80% of the GHG emissions. That is, the urban centers account for that. And that is in terms of the mitigation side. On the adaptation side, the cities also face serious resilience risks. So just to give an example, 70% of the urban land is expected to be exposed to high frequency urban flooding in the coming decade. Similarly, just the value of coastal cities in terms of the assets which are under risk through sea level rise is estimated to be the range of $4 trillion. Just 6 coastal cities of India, the Chennais and the Mumbais, etc. So they have a big challenge in terms of how do they cope up with this one. So cities are also a sort of an opportunity to look at an integrated way for climate action, because it encompasses multiple sectors and it encompasses both mitigation as well as resilience and adaptation challenges. So I would say that the way to do it is to look at 3 pillars in terms of at the city level, which is to look at what are the sectoral policies that need to change. How do we scale up the investments required in sort of urban interventions? A lot of the urban interventions, by the way, tend to be also climate smart. I mean, in the sense, just to give you one example, is solid waste management. Investing in solid waste management and reducing the extent of solid waste which is dumped and not treated will reduce the level of GHG emissions, because solid waste being dumped is a big source of GHG emissions. So that one. And the third thing is back to our topic of capacity, because the city governments who have to take on the climate action interventions at the city level. And so unless they have the capacity to do so, they will not be able to sort of do that. So in terms of sectoral policies, I meant things like, can we have risk-informed urban planning to make sure that the people are not settling in hazardous areas? Can we have urban planning for more compact cities so that we can reduce the urban transport footprint and again have a reduction in GHG emissions? Can we, similarly for the flooding, can we have a robust master plan to prevent urban flooding, which looks at stormwater drainage, nature-based solutions in terms of absorption of water through green areas and things like that. Another big part of the GHG emissions, which is besides the urban transport at the city level, is buildings, which is residential and commercial, and besides solid waste, which I just mentioned. So there again, of course, the buildings energy efficient part is a big energy related agenda in terms of renewables and all that, but the city government can help influence that by giving incentives for better building codes and green spaces and things like that. So that's on that part. And in terms of investment and financing, it's again back to what we discussed in terms of, can we get cities to ramp up investments? And so before the cities can talk about green bonds and climate financing, they need to raise financing to begin with. So that is so that again is back to the whole agenda of how do we strengthen the creditworthiness, how do we enhance the level of capital financing, which in turn will feed into the whole thing. And lastly, as was mentioned, we also need a lot more analytics of the climate part at the city level. I mean, I don't think we really understand what is the path of GHG emissions. We don't have a really understanding about what is the economic losses caused due to the urban flooding. what is the impact of the heat waves which cities experience, I mean, in terms of lost or days of work or whatever. So we need a lot more analytics which can sort of help underpin the sort of interventions that we take up in terms of the climate agenda, which, by the way, is very similar to the ongoing regular urban interventions, whether it's Swachh Bharat on solid waste, whether it's Amrut-related water, wastewater, and stormwater drainage. So all of them, but to tie them all together, we need a lot more stronger analytics of related to climate, and then we sort of through conducive policy, which is primarily the domain of state governments, with the advocacy maybe from central government, to help cities move on this sort of climate agenda, and they can sort of help the sort of city move towards a lower carbon footprint while also becoming more climate resilient. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Raghu. I think the last budget actually spoke a lot about asset monetization and disinvestment as a means of finance. Disinvestment, of course, we had Air India as one big success, the biggest big success, because not only because of the transaction, but because it got acceptance from all quarters. And we at EY were very thrilled to be a part of it. But unless the LIC disinvestment happens during this balance year, we are going to be far short of the disinvestment target. We have the monetization program, and where we have, the monetization pipeline has been worked out. So, Shankar, I would like to come to you and take your suggestions on how to move ahead with the monetization program, how we can use innovative value capture of large infra development projects, or getting further private investments or funds to come in.
Yeah, thanks, Sudeep. So I would touch upon more from a land monetization perspective. That's basically the non-core, since you covered the airports and all or the related aspects. More from an urban perspective, the land monetization, as I mentioned a little while ago, is about, I think it is important to have the usability of that particular land, and then you identify the partner or identify the person who is going to take it up. And today, while currently we're advising some of the agencies who are coming into the monetization of these assets. So 2 or 3 challenges over there. Today, while the asset is of good value, but we don't have a company to take it up, because the whole problem here is that the bidding process and the related challenges, we need to have a kind of a standardized bidding process so that the consistency is ensured, and the capacity is not there, because the capacity with the agencies who's running these mandates, we don't have adequate knowledge in the asset monetization perspective. I think it is important to create a kind of a capacity building initiative around it. Also, the exposure towards the funds attract international investments to those projects is not there because of a lot of challenges. I don't want to get into the details of them. And when you develop those assets, can we get into, let's say, real estate investment trust, REIT, and all those exit routes? Today, nothing is available. And while the developers are struggling with their own projects, they're not attracted towards these offerings because the projects are not viable. And also, I think on a separate note, it's very important to look at, relook at the VGF of 20%. Can it go up? That is also very important, because today we have a lot of projects coming in. Many of these projects are not viable, and 20% is not enough at all. On this particular aspect, I think we need to look at very closely, because most of these lands are being developed for real estate purposes. I mean, it could be an office or retail or whatever. So what is so important here at this point in time is we need to provide a kind of an industry status for real estate sector. So moment it gets an industry status, the developers would be aligned to get into those land parcels owned by government agencies, even though there are nitty-gritties around taking up those land parcels. And also, it is very important to have some incentives. It could be a discount on registration charges. It could be it could be anything related to stamp duty. On all that, I think more incentives to the developer will make them move into those land parcels owned by government. Otherwise, again, we have gone through a lot of stages, but not much is happening at this point in time. I stop here, Sandeep.
Yeah, Shankar, thank you. I think it's very interesting because if we look at the top corporates in the last 2 to 3 years, they have substantially deleveraged their balance sheets. So the capacity of raising debt and funding is substantially there with the private sector companies, but at least the larger companies. But I think it is our failure not to be able to offer them feasible, viable, and safer projects. So I think your suggestions of a higher BGF, a very well identified cash flow and tariff structure could work wonders, because the fund is there with them. Unlike what the general perception is at this point of time, Indian companies do have funds, do have the capacity of raising further funds. So I think it's the right time to look at the project preparation and development and for feasibility of this. So I'll just come to Vijay Lakshmi. I think you did mention that L&T has been working in the smart city, smart sector in a long way. So my question to you is that we now have the smart city program coming to an end. When we started out, there was a lot of questions about the utility of the solutions that are being created. There was a lot of criticism around the ICCCs. But the ICCCs turned out to be savior during the COVID times. So your take on how useful the smart solutions have been. And the second question is, now that the smart city program is coming to an end, what next? How do we take it to the next level?
Thank you, Sudeep. Yes, I had been fortunate enough to be part of the smart city mission from its inception. As a project finance professional, I had looked into in terms of the social and economic benefits derived by these cutting edge smart solutions that we have extended to the smart cities that we have implemented. And I'll just give you the actual benefit that each of these cities have, a few examples. We have implemented Hyderabad Safe City project. Revenue do come to give you a sample. In a single year, Hyderabad City Police were able to raise more than 4 lakh each allowance. That is revenue to them. At the same time, they've been able to bring down the crime rate by 14%. Within the 6 months that we had implemented the Mumbai surveillance project, the incidence of chain snatching fell by 50%, which is a huge social benefit. And today we are able to save kids who had been kidnapped within a span of 5 to 6 hours using the CCTV feeds. For example, the Prayagraj smart city, we have seen that the crime data and road accident data, 83% reduction in the road accidents in the last 2 years is what we've recorded. If you take both Vizag and Nagpur together in terms of more than 1 lakh street smart lights that they had implemented, these two municipal corporations have saved somewhere around 30% in terms of the overall energy consumption. If you want me to take you through a larger project, the early warning dissemination system, where we've been able to evacuate the people vulnerable who are living in the vulnerable zones to the cyclone shelters funded by the World Bank. We saved around 1.2 million people from Cyclone Fani last year without any fatality. You will recall the 1999 super cyclone where we've lost precious 15,000 lives. And the crowd management is better. We did not have any stampede during the Kumbh Mela, where 23 crore people converged over a period of 45 days. And we are seeing improvement in this utilities, power utilities, through the smart meter project, where effectively we brought in the transmission loss to the extent of 30%. Billing efficiency have improved by 20%. So the revenue itself has gone up by 20%. Now, how do we extend these benefits across to other cities? And all our command and control centers were converted into COVID war rooms. And those cities who had these systems were able to control it better, is what we have seen. Take it to the tier 2 cities, where we have identified 4,000 cities with more than 5 lakh population. So simple solutions, successful solutions can be extended to the other cities as well. And unfortunately, as a country, we rank 1 in the number of people who are being killed in road accidents, and 60% is contributed to the accidents in the national highway. So if we can implement intelligent traffic management systems, smart ambulance services, and smart lighting in national highway alone, I think we would do good. And we need to move from the physical systems, now that we have experience in doing that, to more of software-driven solutions and big data analytics across various ministries, be it healthcare, agriculture, transport, education, taxation, where we already have data, not just from these ministries, but the 109 smart cities as well. We'll have to do big data analysis in identifying the inefficiencies, which will bring in intelligent decision making to address those challenges. So these are some of the benefits that can be extended to the rest of the countries, and I hope the upcoming budget would have measures in terms of addressing these.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. I think we've just run out of time. It's been a very, very interesting discussion. We could probably continue for an hour or so. But we just ended, we reached 6:30 and that's the time. So I think I can see Nirja starting to frown. So Nirja, I'll put you up to you now to.
Right. Thank you very much for your time. With this, we come to the end of a very interactive webinar. It has been informative and engaging discussion. I would like to thank all our speakers, Dr. Agarwal, Mr. Shankar, Mr. Keswan, Vijayalakshmi ji, for so generously responding to all the questions. I'm very confident that participants have immensely benefited with your deep knowledge and understanding of the subject. Last but not the least, my special thanks to Sudeep for so well structuring and beautifully conducting this session and bringing out the best from our panelists. Thank you all the delegates for taking out time on a Friday evening to join us for this program. Well, thank you once again and see you very soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.